This is Real Oregon Lifestyle with Andrea Fay and Jenn Fiddler, two licensed real estate brokers who share their love of all things Oregon.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Real Oregon Lifestyle. I'm Andrea Fay.
I'm Jennifer Fiddler.
And today we're going to talk about another great topic, one that I have a great example of. This is going to be all about HOAs and condos. And so to start off, I'll go ahead and just share my very recent experience with a condo. And so this condo is one that was a smaller condo complex. And we showed the property. Everything looked good. There were a couple questions that I had for the listing agent about the HOA and how much the dues were, what those dues covered. And I got an interesting answer from the listing agent who mentioned that, quote, the HOA is kind of loosey-goosey, is what she said. And to me, that was a little bit of a red flag, that there could be an issue there. But we still pursued it. And, just to make sure that I was covering all of my bases and all of our ducks were in a row, I ended up asking one of my lender friends to look into that particular condo to see if it was in fact financeable. And, we still, because it was on the weekend, we had to write the offer, get the offer submitted, but we did make it contingent on finding out if this condo was actually financeable or not. We found out luckily before the seller had responded to our offer, that it was not in fact financeable. And so we were able to rescind our offer, no harm done. Just happy that everybody, saved time, money, effort, all of that stuff. And now my buyers are looking for something else, which is fine. But with that, it brings up, there's a lot of things to know about condos and just homeowners associations in general. And so Jenn has compiled all kinds of great information for us about some of these things. So,
yeah. HOA, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but yeah, HOAs and condos in general are kind of their own thing. When you're buying in a condo, there is a certain number of things that you want to be looking for. And as part of your offer, you're going to have a contingency in there to be able to review all of the homeowners association documents. That includes everything from the bylaws to the codes, covenants, and restrictions, the financials, the reserve study, the meeting minutes, the rules and regulations, all of that. When you're in that review process, one of the big things that you want to look for is, does this condo have any assessments or litigation? Oftentimes you'll see where an HOA hasn't really funded their reserves well. So say that there's a roofing project, for example, and a condo complex needs a whole new roof for a set of, let's say, 25 units. That can be extremely costly. And if the HOA doesn't have the reserve in their bank account to be able to cover the cost of that, oftentimes what they'll do is get a loan and they'll pay for it that way. But in the meantime, they'll assess the owners, and it can be, quite costly. I've seen HOA assessments as high as $15,000, $20,000 per unit to cover the cost of the repairs that need to be done. Mm-hmm. So that's a really big thing that you want to find out when you're buying in a condo or an HOA. I see that a lot with townhouses around here as well, where exterior maintenance is covered. Assessments and any kind of pending litigation, oftentimes a lender won't lend on it, for starters. And even if they will lend on it, just as an owner, you want to know what you're getting into as far as the health of the HOA and what potential repairs that you might be paying for are.
Absolutely. In the case of my example, we had this particular complex only had 4 units. And So is rather small, but I could tell that some of the units had a new roof and others did not, which was also a red flag to me that perhaps owners were taking care of some of those items on their own, but it was really hard to tell just from an initial showing how that arrangement was made and what the actual bylaws, say about who takes care of exterior maintenance and things like that. And so it was one of those there's several reasons why this one is not financeable, but um those smaller complexes, they can be a little bit more loosey goosey, and in that case that it can make it so they're not financeable.
Yeah, I've had cases where we've come back where the lender has said that they won't lend on it. I was in contract for a small condo complex. I believe there was 12 units in Tigard, and when the condo cert came back from the lender, it said that a certain percentage of the owners were in arrears on their HOA dues, which made it non-financeable. And so when that's one reason that it could be non-financeable, another reason is if a certain entity owns a percentage of the units, oftentimes Fannie and Freddie guidelines, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac will say that you can't lend on that property because if one investor owns, say, 8 of the 12 units, then a bank isn't going to lend on that. So there's just stricter guidelines when it comes to condos and townhouses that you need to A, be in contact with your lender about, and B, that you just want to know going into it and how that might affect your sellability in the future. Because even if you're paying cash for a condo or a townhouse, which I know is the case with Andrea's particular clients, if you get into a place where you own a condo that you can't resell in the future for some reason, that might not be a good option for you.
Absolutely. And you're right. In this case, these folks needed to use cash for tax reasons. And it would have made it, yeah, they could have purchased it. That's not the issue. But the issue is, can they resell it in the future? And, if we were to change the market, say we were not in a seller's market and all of a sudden we were in a buyer's market, um, that would be really tough to try and sell that condo when it's not financeable. So it really is kind of looking down the road and what are all the possible things that could go wrong. This one in particular is a unique case also because there's only 4 units, and it would be very easy for that whole complex to slip in and out of compliance with the Fannie and Freddie guidelines. I know it may not even have to do with, one particular investor owning a certain number of units, or a certain percentage of units. Sometimes it can be multiple investors. And so if the investor to owner occupied ratio is too high, then they're going to have an issue with that. But with only 4 units, that can change very quickly. And so it's pretty high risk to be able to purchase something unless you actually fully know the risks and you know that that it could take a while to sell in the future, then sure, go into it with your eyes wide open.
Yeah, I think it just depends on what your long-term goal is. If you're going to have it for a rental for the next 30 years and you don't really care, that could be a strategy where, going into it that it doesn't matter. But if you're thinking you're going to sell it and you're going to live there and sell it in 5 years, it's something you definitely want to look into. On that note, I compiled a list of besides the financing issues that you need to look into when you're looking into buying in a condo association or anything with an HOA. Pet policies. You need to look at what those particular pet policies might be. I have a listing in Hillsborough where all the dogs have to be on a leash. There's a shared neighborhood park. They wanted to make it a dog park. The owners voted against that. And we had a buyer who was really interested in the property, but as soon as they saw that they couldn't use that as a dog park, they decided not to purchase. So look at the pet policies. Sometimes there's breed limits and weight restrictions. Other rules, there's oftentimes a set of general neighborhood rules like pool policies, clubhouse rules, just general rules for the neighborhood. And they're there for a reason to keep the property values up and the community looking nice. But if you're not the kind of person that would be fitting into that type of situation where you want to follow rules, then a condo or an HOA might not be a good choice for you. Rental restrictions. What are your future plans for the property? If there is a rental cap on the number of units that can be rentals, and say you're moving into it with the idea of living there for 5 years and then turning it into a rental, just make sure that when you are thinking about that, that in the future that rental cap could be full and you have to either sell the property or wait until the rental cap is not full anymore. So that's something to think about. Parking. That was one thing that I thought was important to look at.
That's
Guest
a big one
parking.
too.
Yeah.
That one's a really big concern, especially, I mean, anywhere parking is always a big deal.
Yeah, always. Number of guest spots can sometimes be really hard to come by. So if you're a person that entertains a lot, you might not want to get into a homeowners association or condo complex. What's included? What are the amenities? Oftentimes up here, I see places that are upwards of $300 a month, and that only includes common area maintenance and front yard landscaping. That doesn't necessarily include exterior maintenance and things like that. So look at what the dues are in relation to what you get. If you get, there's a lot of places up here where it's $300 a month, but you get access to a pool, a clubhouse, exterior maintenance, landscaping, all kinds of different stuff. So what are you really getting for that monthly fee? One of the things that I also encourage people to look at when we're reviewing the homeowners association docs is what's included as far as exterior maintenance. Sometimes roof and siding will be covered, but windows will be excluded. So if you need to replace the windows, that's on you. So those are things that, everybody just thinks, oh, exterior maintenance, anything that happens with the outside of the house will be covered. Not necessarily. There's also a process. I own a condo in Sherwood where we have some exterior maintenance stuff that needs to be done. And we put in our request to the homeowners association probably about 6 weeks ago, and they still haven't done the work. So it's not something that can happen on your time schedule. It happens at the discretion of the homeowners association. So if you're somebody where it might bother you to have maintenance and deferred items that don't get taken care of on your time frame, a homeowners association or condo complex might not be a good choice for you.
It's interesting too, is a lot of these homeowners associations are run by people that are just your average Joe. They probably live in the complex. So they have some ownership there. However, they may not have any experience running this type of an association. And so usually the ones that are run a little bit better are done by professionals. At least that's my opinion. The professionals seem to keep track of the investor to owner occupied ratios a little bit better. They do all their, the bookkeeping and accounting is much more clear and defined. The meetings are run like they're supposed to be. But not all of them are done that way. And some of these smaller ones that are done by the owners can be a little bit tricky. And you're basically at the mercy of someone that probably already has a full-time job, or they're maybe retired, but they kind of just get to whatever the issue is when they get to it. And so it can be a little time consuming. So you can't expect to get anything done like really fast.
That's definitely true. There's some big property managers around here. There's several in Portland, and for the most part, each individual community has their own homeowner association liaison that you can communicate with, which is really nice. I'm looking at my list here. I think we talked about, the financing issues and things like that. The biggest thing that I stress to people when I'm selling them a condo is the reserve study, or in a homeowners association. Look at that reserve study, so a reserve study is a plan for all the future maintenance and things that need to be done to either the community or the properties themselves. And they'll often have a schedule of repairs. Say in 2025, all the roofs need to be replaced. This is the cost per unit. Is that accounted for in the monthly dues? How much can the dues go up per year? Oftentimes there's a cap in the homeowners association bylaws and rules that say they can only go up 3% a year or something like that. So those are a couple things that are really important to look into. And we have a little bit of experience in interpreting these rules, but I always recommend that if it's a really complex situation, somebody take their documents to an attorney to have them take a look at them and evaluate.
I think that's very wise because these documents are written by attorneys, and
Mhm.
and it should be interpreted by an attorney. And yes, I mean, for the most part, a lot of the rules, like the dog rules and things like that, are pretty self-explanatory. But yeah, some of these reserve studies and stuff are. It's very important to know that the dues that you're going to be paying, that those reserves are gonna be built up properly and that they're not gonna be short, and then all of a sudden 1 year your dues go up dramatically. So, it's really important to be able to know what that is. And it's also important for resale because, if, the year that you resell, all of a sudden those dues go up, you need to be able to explain what that's all about and know that they're not gonna probably go up dramatically based on your choosing that condo.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And this is not to say that we don't encourage people to buy in homeowners associations and condo complexes. There's some huge advantages. If you're not a person that likes to do exterior maintenance and things like that to your house or landscaping, uh, an HOA can be a really, really good option for that. There's low maintenance, there's sense of security, there's upkeep of the property, and you're in a place where that people are going to have to be following rules. They can't keep their trash out on their porch for 2 days and things like that. Those are all things that condos and HOAs have huge advantages.
There's also a
And
sense of community too that, I think that can be missed, with just your regular single family home, and that sense of community can be really important to many different age groups. So I think they're a great place. I think they can be a good place for people to start, and I think they can be a great place for retired folks too.
yeah, absolutely. I think it's just like anything else, do your research and make sure that you're the kind of person that wants to live in a homeowners association and can deal with some rules that will ultimately be beneficial for you in the future. Just like I said, keep your eyes open when you're going into it and work with somebody that can help you navigate that process.
Absolutely. One question that we do get a little bit is, what is the difference between a townhome and a condo? Because there is a difference, and um, you know, it- how would you explain that to someone that's just getting into the market?
So with a condo, you own a percentage of all of the elements in the condo complex. There's a percentage of ownership per unit. With a townhouse, you own the land underneath you and all of the elements of the house. In a condo complex, obviously you own your own property, but you also own ownership in the other elements of, say there's a pool, say there's, you know, parking spaces and things like that. That's your percentage of ownership of the whole, if that
Uh,
makes sense.
It does make sense, and a lot of times we see on townhomes that, yes, you own your unit and that little chunk of land that your part of the unit sits on. But some of them, depending on when they were built and developed, sometimes they don't have any kind of an agreement with the party next to them. So that can be a little bit risky, not knowing. Say, for instance, that they shared a roof, not knowing if you're gonna have to all of a sudden chalk up a new roof with the other owner, and whether or not that other owner is gonna have the money to be able to put towards that new roof.
Yeah, I had the listing for a townhouse that did not have a homeowners association, and it was kind of unclear when it came to paint how that was going to be handled. And there was clusters of 4 townhouses, and they were kind of spread out, and everybody on the street had banded together and painted their units except for the particular unit cluster that my listing was in. And the owner of the property had talked to the people next door and said, "Hey, do you want to paint? This is how much it would cost. This is the bid." And they just didn't have the money to do it. So it looks, I've seen it too, where there's a line down the middle of a shared wall where one side is painted and one side hasn't. And it looks kind of funny, but again, no going into it. Those are things that you could potentially be looking at.
Absolutely. And, HOAs always kind of get like, a bad rep, and they're not always bad. There are rules in place to protect each individual homeowner. And so they're not actually a bad thing. There are some benefits, like a lot of times they have rules to not keep junky cars, either in the condo parking lot, or you're not allowed to change your oil in the parking lot and things like that. But they do that for a reason, so people don't get a little bit too loosey goosey with, leaving their trash out and stuff like that. So everything looks good and it's got a more sellable appearance, and
Yeah.
and that's just common sense and just common courtesy for your neighbors.
Yeah. And to have somebody to enforce that is nice. Then it doesn't have to be you. I owned a house in Beaverton. I guess this was 6, 7 years ago now. And we didn't have a homeowners association, and 90% of the people on the street kept up their house and it looked really nice and their landscaping was wonderful. But we had Chad, and Chad lived on the corner, and every weekend his garage threw up into his driveway and he would be out there cutting wood at like 2 o'clock in the morning and doing all kinds of crazy projects. And he's the guy that, and you've heard this story before, I came home one day and there was a bunch of mannequins on his lawn. I mean, it was
The
weird.
mannequin. Yeah, I remember the mannequin guy.
Yeah. And so at that point, I really was hoping that there was something I could do. And I talked to the city, and the city at a certain point will start to enforce things like, broken down cars in the street and stuff like that. But there's really not a whole lot that they're willing to do when it comes to just junk and stuff in the front yard. And so it was kind of a point of contention with a lot of the neighbors. And when I went to sell my house, I actually wrote him a little note and I said, I would really, really appreciate if you would just keep your yard looking great for a week or so. Yeah, it was a little bit passive aggressive on my part, but at the same time, I knew that would affect my sale value, even though it was 3, 4 houses down. It just made the neighborhood look junky, and you had to drive by that house to get to my house.
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny because it's hard to enforce that stuff because, to us, that looks like junk. To someone else, that might look like art, and it's hard to be able to differentiate between what is acceptable and what's not. A lot of times HOAs are great about kind of lining out what some of that stuff is, what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, what paint colors are appropriate, what's not appropriate. Um, I think they really are good for communities, especially if you like to live in that type of community that you expect to see that everyone's taking care of their lawns and things like that.
Yeah,
And not
absolutely.
putting mannequins out.
Yeah, the mannequins, that was weird. Nothing
That
we
is
can do about it.
really fun. There's speaking of mannequins, when I drive down Highway 34, there is one when I'm coming from Philomath and going into Corvallis, there is one house that has a mannequin out front, and I do watch to see if they change the clothes on that thing. I think it's always wearing a yellow dress.
That's weird.
It's weird. It's super weird. They do not live in a homeowners association. I mean, that's like right on Highway 34. So I'm pretty sure they get away with having the mannequin out. And by all means, if that's your deal and you don't live in an association, just more power to you. But I don't want to be your neighbor.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's all we have time for today. So thank you all for joining us, and catch us on Instagram, Facebook, and realoregonlifestyle.com. Thank you.
Thank you.